Today, we're going to be answering some questions about sourdough starter. Let's get into it. Welcome back to the Dad Days, everyone. If this is your first time finding me, my name's Josh, and I'm a stay-at-home dad creating content for more than dads. My channel consists of a little bit of everything, from sourdough starter and homemade bread baking to DIY home projects, cooking for my family, and caring for my special medical needs son. These are just a few things the Dad Days are filled with. Please consider liking this video and subscribing to my channel if you're into my content. But without further ado, let's discuss some of these questions. So it's been about a year or more since I've dropped my original sourdough starter video. If you haven't seen it yet, it's called Sourdough Starter in Under 5 Minutes. Easiest method you will find. I'll link it at the end. Ever since that original video, I've put out quite a few videos pertaining to sourdough and bread baking, and I've gotten quite a few questions over the past year. I've put together a list. I've summarized questions and clumped them together, and I've came up with about 5-6 questions that I'm going to answer in this video. And I think I'm going to make this an ongoing series, whether it's once a month or once a quarter, however long it takes for me to receive enough questions to put a video together. I'm going to continue to do this to answer questions for everybody. So let's get into it. The first question is, it's actually a two-part question. I've been asked multiple questions about this, and there's a part A and a part B, so I'll read them both and I'll just answer it all at the same time. It's, how long will my starter last in the fridge if you're not using it while it's in the fridge for extended periods? Do you need to feed it? And part B is, may I freeze my active sourdough starter since I will be away for a couple of months? So part A, how long will it last in the fridge if you're not using it while it's in the fridge for extended periods? It will last a very long time in the fridge. You can forget about it and let it in the fridge by accident for at least a month, if not longer. I would even venture to say maybe 2 months. And you're just going, when you find it, it's going to separate. You're going to have a layer on the top. Some people call it the hooch, but it's a liquid that forms on the top of the sourdough. Sometimes it can be really dark. It can turn almost black on top. That's really okay. I would pour that out, pour the liquid out. I would discard at least 50% of your starter, maybe 75% of your starter. Put your starter on the counter, feed it as you normally would feed it, and leave it on the counter, feeding it twice a day for 2 or 3 days, and then you can just resume back to your normal feeding schedule. It truly will not take long to bring your starter back to an active state. It is very resilient, and it is very hard to kill off your starter. You can neglect it for quite a while and it'll be totally fine. And then as far as freezing it, if you spend a quarter of the year somewhere else, or if you forget about it or whatever, or you just want to have extra added security, you could absolutely freeze your starter. I freeze mine in ice cube trays. I label the bags. It's good in the freezer for 6 to 8 months, and then every 6 to 8 months you can discard the starter you have in the freezer and freeze new ice cubes and relabel it with new dates. and you're totally good. Then you'll always have a backup in the freezer if by chance something happens to your starter that you're actively using. You have a backup and a reserve in the freezer, and you're good to go. You never have to worry about being without a sourdough starter. So that was question 1, part A and B. So we'll move on to question 2. Somebody asks, I am a bit confused with this. Do you always keep your starter in the refrigerator? So the answer to that is basically yes. I almost always keep my starter in the refrigerator. I bake bread about once a week, so 5 or 6 days a week, my starter is in the refrigerator. I take it out the day before I'm going to bake bread, and I remove a scoop from it to create a levain. I then feed my starter, let it sit on the counter for a few hours until it is bubbly, and put it back in the fridge. So that's it. It's in the fridge 5-6 days a week, if not more. I don't bake bread every single week, so sometimes it lives in the fridge for 2 weeks at a time. But that's the pattern that I use my sourdough starter. I get it out once a week. I take a scoop from it to create a levain for my bread. Then I feed my starter, let it get bubbly, sit on the counter till it gets bubbly, and then it goes back in the fridge for another week or 2. That's it. It's very simple. There's rarely even any discard because I'm only removing what I'm going to use to bake bread, and I'm not creating a surplus of starter that I'm dealing with a bunch of discards. So it's pretty simple. Okay. So the third question is, this is a part A and B question as well. How long after you make the starter can you use it? And then when removing mature starter from the fridge to feed it and use it in 6 to 8 hours, do you leave it on the counter? So part A, how long after you make the starter can you use it? I would say it might sound like a bit of a cop-out, but I'm going to refer you to one of my videos. I will link it. I will try to link it here. I will also have it at the end of this video that you can view. I have a how to make sourdough starter from scratch video, and it walks you through from day 1 to day 7 exactly how to make a sourdough starter, everything that you need to do from going from not having a sourdough starter to having an active, bubbly, ready-to-use sourdough starter. So as far as the question goes, how long after you make the starter can you use it? I would say immediately. It takes you about a week to create an active starter. And then once you have an active starter, you can make bread with it. That same day, the first day that your starter is bubbly and active and smells acidic and fresh and sweet, and you have an active starter that's rising, you can use it that day. So it's really about 5 to 10 days and you have an active starter and you can use it immediately, and then you're able to make bread every week with it. So that's really it. You can use it immediately. And then when removing mature starter from the fridge, do you leave it on the counter after you feed it to make it active again to be able to use it? Yes, I remove my starter from the fridge the day before I'm going to be baking. I remove it from the fridge. I take a scoop of it to create a levain for my bread, which is basically like just another little bowl of sourdough starter. I remove a scoop from my jar of sourdough starter. I feed it so it gets active and bubbly, In the meantime, I feed my starter jar as well, and then when it gets active and bubbly on the counter, I put it back in the fridge. So I remove it from the fridge, take what I'm going to use for bread and feed the remaining starter, and then let it sit on the counter until it gets active and bubbly, which is usually a few hours in a 60 to 70 degree house. And then I put it back in the fridge to use in the next week or two. And that's about it. But yes, when you remove it from the fridge to make bread, you let it sit on the counter while it's getting active to use for bread. So that's that question. Somebody else says, mine won't bubble. That's it. That's all they said. Mine won't bubble. I would stick with it. I wouldn't give up. You probably just aren't feeding it as frequently as you should be. Maybe you haven't been working with your starter long enough. You need a few more days. I would feed it once or twice a day, leaving it sit on the counter. Don't put it in the fridge yet if it's not rising and getting bubbly, and just keep feeding it. Let it sit on the counter and feed it every day, once or twice a day, until it starts to bubble. It's really that simple. You probably just haven't been feeding your starter long enough yet. Okay, this is the last question. It says, what happens if you start out your sourdough starter in a big enough container that it won't overflow? Do you still recommend discarding some? I would say that maybe you're just thinking about this in the wrong way. I don't think you need such a big container that you're worried about discarding sourdough starter. I have a medium-sized container. It's rarely even halfway full. See, the thing about sourdough starter, unless you're baking a large volume of bread, you really only need a half a cup or a cup of starter every now and then. So, you're looking at 100 grams to 250 grams or so. Like, that's max for a couple loaves of bread. Unless you're baking more than 2, 3, 4 loaves of bread, you really need such a small amount of starter that you don't really ever have discard. You don't have to worry about having discard unless you're purposely making a ton of starter to have discard to use for other recipes other than bread. But if your goal is to make a sourdough starter and to bake 1 to 3 loaves of bread every week, you can use the method that I use. There's, it's the same method that a lot of people on YouTube use. You can check out many videos that discuss a no discard sourdough starter method. And it's exactly what I do. You leave your starter in the fridge 90% of the time, 5-6 days a week. You take it out once a week to feed it and use it to bake bread. You put it back in the fridge, and that's it. You don't have to worry about discard. You rarely ever have discard because you're only feeding it when you're using it, and you're removing from the jar when you're baking bread. So essentially, you're using your discard to bake your bread once a week. Keeping it in the fridge slows it down. It doesn't allow it to be so active every day that you need to feed it every day. If you had it sitting on the counter and you were feeding it every day, then yeah, you would have a lot of sourdough starter and you would need to discard regularly. And I could see having a bigger container would be more convenient, but even then you're still going to fill it up eventually, and need to discard if you're not baking tons of bread. So I recommend the no discard method. I have a video explaining that sourdough starter in under 5 minutes, so I highly recommend that method. If this video was helpful, please leave a comment below. Let me know if you have any other questions. I would love to do this more often. The faster I receive enough questions, the faster I'll do another video like this. If you have any ideas for videos, if you have a specific idea for a sourdough video, whether it's a more detailed topic about starter or a specific way to make bread or a certain bread recipe or something, please let me know in the comments. I look forward to creating more content for everybody, and as always, stay tuned for more Dad Days.